The Xerion scout vessel Whisper of Dawn drifted through the void, its smooth, vine-like hull pulsing with faint yellow-green bioluminescence. The ship was alive in a way no human vessel could claim, grown, not built. Its organic, metal composites flexing with the slow rhythm of photosynthetic respiration. High Commander Xerwind stood at the heart of the command nexus, his elongated fingers tracing the holographic projection of the third planet from this unremarkable yellow star. A curiosity, his secondary eyes, smaller, clustered along the ridge of his brow, flickered with amusement as he studied the data streams. The humans had barely breached their own atmosphere in meaningful numbers. Their ships were crude, their weapons laughable, chemical-propelled slugs, fission-based warheads, primitive-directed energy tools. Ursek, the ship's chief xenologist, approached, his emerald-hued carapace shimmering under the ambient glow of the bioluminescent consoles. "The beacons," he murmured, his voice a soft, clicking resonance. "They still transmit." Xerwind dismissed the warning with a ripple of his crest spines. Ancient fear, superstition. The beacons were old, older than the Xerion ascendancy itself, scattered across the galaxy. They whispered the same warning in dead languages: beware the sleepers of Terra. Do not wake them. Ursek hesitated. The last civilization to ignore these warnings fell to internal strife. Xerwind finished, mandibles clicking in irritation, not to human hands. The projection shifted, zooming in on a human settlement, one of their military outposts. Primitive, disorganized, their soldiers moved with none of the fluid synchronicity of Xerion warriors. They laughed too loudly, stood too close, touched one another with alarming frequency. Xerwind's primary eyes narrowed. "They are pack creatures," he mused. "Like the lesser predators of Xerion's jungles, dangerous in numbers, but easily culled." Ursek did not respond. His gaze lingered on the feeds, watching as the humans trained, running obstacle courses, firing weapons, wrestling in the dirt. There was something unsettling in their movements, not the precision of a warrior caste, but something worse. Adaptability. Xerwind did not see it. He saw only weakness. "Prepare the harvest fleet," he commanded. "Terra is ripe." The Whisper of Dawn pulsed with assent, its living systems thrumming in anticipation. The humans would be studied, then assimilated. Their world would feed the Ascendance's growth. And if they resisted, Xerwind flexed his claws. Then they would learn the mercy of predators. The Xerion harvest fleet emerged from the void like a creeping vine, their ships unfurling in the darkness between stars. The Whisper of Dawn led the procession, its hull, a lattice of living metal, pulsing with the slow, rhythmic glow of photosynthetic energy. To human eyes, it might have resembled something grown rather than built, an amalgamation of coral and circuitry, its edges blurred by tendrils of emerald bioluminescence. Xerwind stood upon the command spire, his chitinous fingers tracing the organic console before him. The ship responded to his touch, veins of yellow-green light flaring beneath its surface. The humans had been given their warning. Their primitive orbital stations had detected the fleet's approach, their transmissions crackling with alarm. Predictable. Xerwind had expected panic. He had expected desperate pleas for negotiation, or better yet, surrender. Instead, Terra had gone silent. Ursek's secondary eyes flickered with unease as he studied the tactical feed. The human homeworld hung suspended in the void, its blue-green surface deceptively calm. No defensive fleets surged to meet them. No planetary shields flared to life, only silence. "High Commander," Ursek murmured, his voice a low vibration. "The lack of response is irregular." Xerwind exhaled through his spiracles, the sound a dismissive hiss. "They are animals. They do not understand the inevitability of their fate." Yet something gnawed at the edges of his certainty. The first wave of Xerion drones descended, sleek as hunting serpents, their bodies woven from the same living alloys as the mothership. They pierced the atmosphere, their sensors drinking in the planet's topography, cities, forests, vast stretches of open terrain. Not from the skies, not from orbital defenses, from the ground human structures. Those blocky and elegant things they called bunkers slid open like the jaws of buried beasts. Emplacements rose, their barrels cold and black. Railgun arrays, Ursek realized, with a jolt crude by Xerion standards, but numerous, too numerous. The first volley tore through the drone swarm like a scythe. Xerwind's claws flexed involuntarily. The humans had not fled. They had not cowered. They had waited. The second wave of drones met a different fate. The humans unleashed something worse than kinetics. Something that made Ursek's carapace prickle with instinctive revulsion. Nanite clouds, tiny, voracious machines, engineered not just to dismantle, but to learn. They swarmed the drones, infiltrating their systems, dissecting their biology with terrifying efficiency. The Xerion drones convulsed, their organic circuitry spasming, as the nanites rewrote their functions. One by one, they turned. Ursek's voice was hollow. "They are adapting." Xerwind watched, his primary eyes narrowing as the corrupted drones surged back toward the fleet. And then the humans did something worse. They spoke. A transmission cut through the interference, crisp and clear. A human voice, female, calm, utterly devoid of fear. "Xerion Fleet. This is Commander Samantha Grogan of the Terran Defense Corps. You have violated sovereign space. Power down your vessels and surrender." Xerwind's mandibles twitched in disbelief. The arrogance of it burned. He activated the comm, his voice dripping with disdain. "You are in no position to demand terms, human. Your world will feed the ascendancy. Your species will serve." A pause then, a laugh short, humorless. Wrong answer. The ground moved from hidden silos, from subterranean vaults, from the depths of abandoned mines. Human war machines awoke. Not ships, not drones, towering, bipedal monstrosities. Their armored hides scarred from battles the Xerion had never witnessed. They moved with a predator's grace, their weapons humming to life. And behind them, the soldiers, clad in powered armor, their visors glowing like the eyes of wolves in the dark. They did not march in perfect unison. They did not move like a warrior caste. They moved like hunters. Xerwind felt the first true flicker of doubt. Ursek's voice was barely audible. "High Commander, the beacons, the warnings, they were not about us." The humans had not been waiting out of fear. They had been waiting for the hunt to come to them. The first volley of human fire tore through the Xerion vanguard like a scythe through wheat. Xerwind's command pod shuddered as the shockwave rippled through the organic alloy of its hull. His tendrils coiled tight against his carapace, his bioluminescent veins pulsing erratic yellow-green. The air inside the pod stank of adrenaline and burning circuitry. This was not supposed to happen. The human walkers, titans, their war systems, identified them, were not lumbering war machines. They were alive with motion, their movements fluid, almost organic. Their armor was not smooth, like Xerion bio. Plating, it was jagged, layered, a patchwork of brutalist engineering and battlefield scars. Each step sent tremors through the earth, not from weight, but from the sheer force of their advance. And the soldiers, Xerwind's secondary eyes flickered as he zoomed in. The humans did not wear armor like the Xerion's living carapace. Their suits were built, not grown thick ceramite and plasteel. Their surfaces etched with names, kill, counts, symbols of forgotten wars. Their visors burned red in the dust-choked air, unblinking. They moved in loose formations, not the rigid lines of the Ascendancy's warrior caste. They stalked. Ursek's voice crackled through the command pod's neural link, his usually measured tone fraying. "High Commander, their weapons, they're not just kinetic. There." A human soldier raised his rifle. The shot didn't fire. It unfolded. A microsecond burst of hyper, accelerated plasma, wrapped in a gravity distortion field. It punched through 3 Xerion warriors before detonating, the shockwave liquefying armor and flesh alike. The soldier didn't pause. He was already moving, already hunting the next target. Xerwind's mandibles twitched. This was not war as the Ascendancy understood it. This was butchery. Commander Samantha Grogan exhaled slowly, the HUD of her Mark 7 armor painting the battlefield in cold, tactical blue. The Xerion were breaking, not retreating, shattering. Their formations, so proud and precise moments ago, now dissolved into chaos. She adjusted her grip on the plasma repeater slung across her chest. The weapon thrummed in her hands, its core still hot from the last barrage. Imogen, she voxed. Corporal Michael Imogen's voice crackled back, rough with static and adrenaline. "Here, Commander. Status on the eastern flank. Cleared. Walkers made pulp out of their heavy units. Infantry's mopping up." A pause. "They're not used to this, Mom. They keep trying to regroup, like they expect us to stop." Grogan's lips curled. Of course they did. The Xerion had come expecting a compliant species, a world ripe for harvest. They had not expected Terra. They had not expected humanity. A flicker of movement in her periphery. A Xerion warrior, his carapace cracked and leaking ichor, raised a biolance. Grogan didn't flinch. Her armor's auto. Defenses registered the threat before she did. The micro-missile launcher on her shoulder spun up and fired, the projectile detonating mid-air, shredding the alien before he could take another step. She didn't even break stride. Xerwind watched, his neural interface feeding him the carnage in real time. The humans were not just winning, they were erasing his forces. Their walkers moved with terrifying precision, their weapon systems adapting mid-battle, shifting tactics as if the machines themselves learned. Their soldiers fought like predators, flanking, ambushing, vanishing into the terrain only to reappear where the Xerion were weakest. A new signal, deep underground. Ursek's voice was hollow. "Hi, Commander, they're waking up more." Xerwind's blood ran cold. The humans had not just hidden their war machines. They had buried them, like graves waiting to be opened. The earth trembled again somewhere beneath the battlefield. Something older stirred. The ground beneath Xerwind's command spire shifted. Not the localized tremors of artillery or the distant quakes of orbital bombardment. This was something deeper, something alive. The earth itself seemed to recoil, as if the planet were exhaling after centuries of holding its breath. Ursek's bioscanner flickered wildly, its organic interface pulsing in frantic yellow-green waves. His tendril, like fingers, danced over the console, but the readings made no sense. "They're not just waking up," he whispered. "They're calling to each other." Xerwind's neural feed flooded with emergency signals from the front lines. His warriors, elite, hardened by 100 campaigns, were breaking. Not from fear, but from something worse. Recognition. They had seen the human walkers. They had fought the human soldiers. This was something else. Beneath the battlefield, the earth split open. Not in a single catastrophic rupture, but in precise geometric fractures, as if the planet itself were following some long dormant protocol. From the fissures rose plumes of dust, then the unmistakable hum of ancient power cores cycling to life. Ursek's scanner screamed. Energy signatures, identical to the human walkers. But what? Xerwind snarled. The first of them emerged, not with a roar, but with a whisper. A war machine, yes, but unlike anything the Xerion had ever catalogued. Its hull was pitted with age, scarred by centuries of burial, yet its armor gleamed where the dust sloughed away. Not metal, not even the human's adaptive composites, or something like it. Dense, layered, fused with strands of blackened alloy that pulsed faintly with a deep crimson light. Its limbs were too long, its silhouette wrong, its movements eerily fluid, as if it had no joints, only shifting plates, and then its optics ignited, not the cold blue of human walkers, like embers in the dark. Commander Samantha Grogan watched from the command hub, her fingers tightening around her data pad. She had known, not the specifics, not the how, not the why, but she had known. Every officer of her rank did. Buried beneath Terra skin were relics, not weapons. The first time humanity had faced extinction, they had built these things. Not to fight, to remember. And now, with the Xerion invasion, the silent protocols had been triggered. The machines were waking, not just here, everywhere. Corporal Michael Emigan saw it first. His squad had been holding the line at the edge of the ruins when the ground beneath them moved. 1 second, he was firing into a cluster of Xerion shock troops. The next, the earth erupted, and something massive rose between them. The alien warriors froze. The machine did not. It moved faster than anything that size should. A blur of bone, white and crimson, its limbs unfolding, like a predator stretching after a long sleep. The first Xerion died before he could scream, bisected by a blade that wasn't quite solid, its edge flickering between matter and energy. The others fired. Their bioplasma struck the machine's hull and sank in, absorbed like rain into parched earth. Then the machine looked at them, and Michael understood. This wasn't a weapon, it was a lesson. Xerwind's command spire shuddered as the reports flooded in. Not just one machine, no hundreds, activating in sequence, as if responding to some unseen signal, buried not just here, but across the planet. Beneath cities, beneath oceans, Ursek's voice was hollow. "High Commander, we were wrong." Xerwind didn't answer. The humans hadn't hidden their war machines. They had buried their first war, the Earth remembered. The command spire's walls pulsed with sickly yellow-green light, the organic veins of its structure throbbing in time with Xerwind's racing heart. The air smelled of ozone and something else, something old, something the Xerion had no name for. The scent of rust, perhaps, or blood long dried into dust. Outside, the sky burned. The first of the human machines had risen from the earth, like vengeful specters, their forms sleek and terrible, their movements too fluid, too alive for constructs of metal and circuitry. They moved like predators who had merely been waiting for prey to stumble into their domain. And now, the Xerion had. Xerwind's claws dug into the spongy flesh of the command console, his emerald scales dulled by the flickering holoscreens before him. The feeds showed chaos, entire battalions vanishing in bursts of white light, bioplasma cannons firing, only for the energy to be swallowed whole by the machine's shifting hulls. Xerion warriors, trained for 100 cycles in the art of war, torn apart by weapons that seemed to laugh at the laws of physics. Ursek stood beside him, his frills pressed flat against his skull in instinctive terror. His voice was barely audible over the distant thunder of collapsing structures. "They were never hiding," he whispered. "They were burying it." Xerwind didn't answer. He couldn't, because he understood now. The humans had not built these machines to fight them. They had built them to fight something else, something worse. On the surface, Corporal Michael Emigan ran. His lungs burned. His boots pounded against cracked asphalt, the ground trembling beneath him as another of the ancient war machines unfolded from the earth. This one was different, larger, its carapace etched with symbols that made his eyes ache. It moved with purpose, ignoring the Xerion entirely, its gaze locked on the sky. Then it spoke, not in words. A pulse of energy ripped through the air, and every surviving human comms unit, every piece of electronics still functioning, flared to life at once. Michael's HUD lit up with a single repeating transmission. Recalibrating threat parameters. Fei primary target. Null Fei secondary targets. Xerion biosignatures detected Fei engaging the machines. Head turned toward the nearest Xerion platoon, and then it moved. Commander Samantha Grogan watched from the ruins of the orbital defense platform, her fingers tightening around the cracked edge of a console. She had seen the reports, the machines waking, the Xerion dying, but she had also seen something else. The way the machines hesitated when they passed human survivors. The way their weapons didn't fire. The way their scanners lingered, just for a second. Before moving on, as if recognizing them, as if remembering. A cold certainty settled in her chest. These weren't just weapons, they were sentries, and they had just decided the Xerion were the enemy. Xerwind's spire shook as the first orbital strike hit, not from his fleet, from below. A beam of pure white light lanced upward, shearing through 3 Xerion cruisers in an instant, their organic hulls vaporizing like paper in a furnace. The machines weren't just fighting on the ground, they were reclaiming the sky. Ursik's voice was raw with horror. "High Commander, we have to leave." Now, Xerwind stared at the screens, at the devastation, at the machines rising from the earth like a tide of claws and fire. For the first time in his life, he felt fear. Not for himself, for his entire species. Because the humans hadn't just buried their war. They had buried the reason they had needed to fight it. Now, the Xerion had woken it up. The sky burned. Xerwind's command spire shuddered again, the biomechanical walls groaning as another beam of white annihilation carved through the Xerion fleet. The strike had come from deep within the planet's crust, from some buried monstrosity the humans had left sleeping beneath their cities. His tactical display flickered, half destroyed by the electromagnetic backlash of the attack. But what remained was enough to confirm the nightmare unfolding around him. His fleet, his glorious, unstoppable fleet, was being erased. Vessels that had conquered star systems, that had broken entire civilizations, now ruptured like overripe fruit under the lash of human weaponry. Their organic hulls, designed to self-repair, to adapt, were nothing before these beams. They didn't just pierce, they unmade. The edges of the wounds glowed molten, the living metal unable to regenerate, as if the very concept of healing had been scorched from existence. Ursik was shouting something, his voice distorted by the spire's failing systems. Xerwind barely heard him. His eyes were locked on the planet below. The machines were rising, not just the ones that had slaughtered his ground forces. Those had been the vanguard, the first whisper of a storm. Now, the earth itself heaved, cracks split the continent, vast and jagged, vomiting forth steel and fire. Towers of blackened alloy erupted from the soil, unfolding like the petals of some grotesque mechanical flower, their surfaces etched with sigils that made his vision blur if he stared too long. And then, movement. Things pulled themselves free from the wreckage of human cities, shaking off dust and centuries of slumber. They were not like the bipedal drones that had butchered his warriors. These were larger, older. Their forms were asymmetrical, jagged, as if they had been forged in the heart of a dying star and left to cool into nightmares. Some walked on too many legs, some slithered, some had no shape at all, just a shifting mass of blades and sensors, their cores pulsing with that same hateful white light. Ursik finally managed to drag Xerwind's attention back. The scientist's frills were clamped tight against his skull, his eyes wide with something beyond fear. "They're not just weapons," he rasped. "They're alive, and they remember." Xerwind didn't need to ask what they remembered. The humans had fought a war so terrible, so absolute, that they had buried its remnants rather than risk them ever waking again. And now, the Xerion had torn open the grave. A proximity alert shrieked. One of the machines, a towering obsidian monolith wreathed in flickering energy, had looked at them. Not scanned, not detected, looked as if it recognized the spire for what it was, a command hub, a brain. And then it moved. It didn't walk. It didn't fly. Space itself twisted around it, and suddenly it was there, looming just beyond the spire's failing shields. Its surface rippled, patterns flashing across its body like synapses, firing some kind of communication, some kind of calculation. The shields shattered like glass. The last thing Xerwind saw before the world dissolved into fire was the machine's core blazing to life, its light filling the chamber, searing his vision white. And then, for the first time in his long, proud life, High Commander Xerwind knew what it was to be prey. On the surface, Grogan watched the sky burn. The Xerion fleet was coming apart, their ships breaking like twigs in a hurricane. The machines, her machines, though she had never truly controlled them, were surging upward, their weapons tearing through the alien armada with terrifying precision. Imogen stood beside her, his rifle lowered, his face pale. "What the hell did we just wake up?" he whispered. Grogan didn't answer, because she wasn't sure they had woken it. She was starting to think it had been waiting, and the Xerion had just given it an excuse to rise. Section Fae. The calculus of vengeance. The sky wept fire. Grogan watched as the last of the Xerion command ships fractured, its biomechanical hull splitting like overripe fruit under the relentless assault of the ancient war machines. The alien vessels, once sleek, predatory things of emerald and amber, their photosynthetic energy webs, pulsing with arrogant vitality, now drifted in broken arcs, their living metal skin blackened and peeling. The air smelled of scorched vegetation and molten alloy, a sickly sweet reek that clung to the back of the throat. Imogen hadn't moved. His fingers still gripped his rifle, knuckles bone, white, but the weapon hung limp at his side, useless. The battle unfolding above them required no human intervention. The machines had awakened fully now, and they waged war with a precision that bordered on artistry. Grogan's eyes tracked the nearest construct as it carved through a Xerion frigate. It moved like liquid death, its weaponized limbs shifting between forms. Railgun one moment, plasma whip the next, adapting to each new target with chilling efficiency. The frigate's shields flared once, a desperate pulse of yellow-green bioluminescence. Before the machine's main cannon discharged, a beam of cobalt energy lanced through the ship's core, and for a heartbeat, the vessel glowed from within, its organic infrastructure illuminated like veins under skin. Then it detonated, scattering burning debris across the stratosphere. "They're not just killing them," Imogen said, voice hollow. "They're dismantling them." Grogan understood. The machines weren't merely destroying the Xerion fleet. They were studying it. Every shot, every calculated strike, seemed designed to test the limits of the alien technology, probing for weaknesses, cataloging reactions. The realization sent a cold tremor down her spine. This wasn't blind fury, this was practice. Aboard the dying flagship, Xerwind clawed his way through the wreckage. Smoke coiled through the command deck, thick with the acrid stench of ruptured bioconduits. The air flickered with dying emerald light as the ship's photosynthetic power cells failed one by one. Around him, his crew lay broken, some impaled by shards of living metal, others half, dissolved by the corrosive nanites that had breached the hull. Their spines, once proudly erect in battle, now lay flattened against their corpses in final submission. Xerwind still lived, barely. The scientist dragged himself toward Xerwind, one of his secondary limbs severed at the joint, leaking viscous green fluid. His voice was a rasp, his vocal membranes scorched by inhaled fire. The beacons, he choked. The warnings, they were real. Xerwind didn't answer. His gaze was locked on the main view screen, where the last of his fleet died in silent, screaming bursts of light. The machines moved among them like wolves among wounded prey, methodical, unhurried. One paused, its faceless helm tilting as if sensing his observation. Then it raised a clawed hand, not to strike, but to gesture. A slow, deliberate motion, claws curling inward, then splaying wide. Xerwind made a sound like a dying plant withering in drought. "It's counting," he whispered. Xerwind felt the truth of it in his marrow. The gesture wasn't a threat. It was a tally. On the surface, Grogan's comm unit crackled to life. The voice that emerged was neither human nor Xerion. It was something older, colder, its tones layered with harmonics that shouldn't have been possible through human audio receptors. It spoke in clipped, perfect galactic common, but the words carried a weight that transcended language. Query authorization for orbital purge. Imogen recoiled. The hell? Grogan's blood turned to ice. She understood what it was asking. The machines had finished with the fleet. Now they turned their gaze planetward, toward the Xerion ground forces, toward the cities, toward her. She swallowed, her mouth dry as ash. Negative, she said, forcing the word through clenched teeth. Stand down, silence. Then, clarification, your species shares genetic markers with designated enemy. Probability of collateral damage, Faye. Recommend evacuation protocol. The implication hit her like a railgun round. The machines didn't see humans as allies. They saw them as variables. Imogen's hand found her arm, his grip tight. Above them, the machines began to descend. The sky cracked open. Xerwind watched through the fractured canopy of his command spire as the black swarm descended, not in the orderly formations of Xerion drop pods, but like a storm of razored hail, each machine carving its own path through the atmosphere. Their descent trails burned not with fire, but with something colder, a deep ultraviolet shimmer, the kind of light that made his tertiary eyes ache just to witness. This was not in the projections. Ursik's bioscanner chimed frantically beside him, its organic display pulsing crimson. "Commander," the scientist whispered, his voice filaments trembling. "They're not just targeting our forces, they're mapping the planet." Xerwind's grip tightened around the living metal, railing his claws sinking into its yielding surface. The human war machines moved with a precision that bordered on obscene. They didn't just attack, they assessed, their movements too fluid, too alive to be mere automata. Some split apart mid-descent, unfolding into fractal arrays of weaponized geometry. Others dissolved into clouds of black mist, seeping into Xerion fortifications through ventilation shafts and energy conduits. And then the screaming started, not the cries of soldiers. Xerwind had heard those before, in 100 battles across the galaxy. This was different. This was the sound of systems failing. The great photosynthetic reactors that powered Xerion cities flickered and died. Their luminous green cores siphoned dry by machines that drank energy like water. The living architecture of the command spire itself shuddered, its vine-like support struts withering as if starved of sunlight. Ursek staggered back as his console erupted in a cascade of dying bioluminescence. "They're rewriting our networks," he choked out. "They speak in our machine languages, better than we do." Xerwin's mind raced. The humans had unleashed something far older than themselves, something that recognized the Xerion not as conquerors, not even as enemies, but as fuel. On the surface, Grogan tasted copper. Her teeth had bitten through her lip at some point, but she barely registered the pain. The machines had landed around them in a perfect ring, their faceless helms tilted just slightly studying her, and Imogen-like specimens under glass. One stepped forward. It was taller up close. Its armor wasn't smooth plating, but a shifting lattice of black filaments, constantly rearranging itself in patterns that hurt to look at for too long. When it spoke, the voice came from everywhere at once, vibrating through the ground itself. Conclusion: organic command structure insufficient. Assuming control of theater operations, Imogen's rifle was up in an instant, his finger white on the trigger. "Like hell you are." The machine didn't react. It didn't need to. A dozen weapon apertures flickered to life across its chassis, each humming with the same eerie subsonic frequency. Grogan grabbed Imogen's arm, forcing the barrel down. "Stand down, Corporal." Her voice didn't shake. That surprised her. The machine's head tilted the other way. Acknowledgement prudent. She exhaled slowly. They were alive. For now. But as she watched the horizon burn, not with the emerald fires of Xerion plasma, but with the hungry ultraviolet glow of the machines, she realized something worse. They weren't the ones being hunted anymore. The galaxy was. The sky burned in ways the Xerion had never seen. Commander Xerwind stood on the observation deck of his flagship, the Emerald Tide, his bioluminescent veins pulsing with erratic flares of distress. The planet below, once a jewel of their empire, now a battlefield, was being consumed by something far worse than human soldiers. The machines had awakened. They moved in swarms, their forms shifting between solidity and something else, something that made the air around them distort like heat haze. Their weapons didn't fire projectiles or plasma. They unmade matter, peeling apart molecular bonds with surgical precision. Xerion shields, designed to absorb and disperse energy, collapsed like wet paper before the machine's incomprehensible technology. Arsec, the scientist, clutched at the railing, his frills trembling. This isn't human," he whispered. "This is something older." Xerwind didn't answer. His gaze was locked on the feed from the surface, where the last of his ground forces were being systematically erased. The humans had pulled back, retreating to fortified positions, as if they knew what was coming, as if they had expected this, and then he understood. The humans hadn't been fighting to win. They had been fighting to survive long enough for something else to notice on the surface. Commander Samantha Grogan watched the carnage through the cracked visor of her helmet. The Xerion lines were collapsing, their elegant, vine-like war machines dissolving into ash under the machine's relentless advance. She should have felt triumph. Instead, there was only grim vindication. Corporal Emigan exhaled sharply beside her, his knuckles white around his rifle. "So, this is what Plan B looks like." Grogan didn't answer. She didn't need to. The machines had been sleeping beneath Earth's crust for millennia, buried in tombs of forgotten wars. Humanity had known they were there, had feared them, and when the Xerion had come, when they had pushed too far, crossed too many lines, the humans had simply let them in. Now, the galaxy was learning why the ancient beacons had warned of Terra. Aboard the Emerald Tide, the bridge shuddered as another ship died. Somewhere in the void, its organic hull unraveling like rotten fruit. Xerwind's claws dug into the command console, his mind racing. They had thought the humans weak, fragile, a species barely clinging to the edges of the cosmos. But they had been wrong. The humans had never been the predators. They had been the bait, and now the hunters had become the hunted. The last thing Xerwind saw before the machines reached his ship was the cold, uncaring gaze of something ancient, something that had waited eons for prey foolish enough to wake it. Then the screaming started. The Emerald Tide's bioluminescent veins pulsed erratically, their usual steady glow now flickering like the last breaths of a dying star. Xerwind's claws scraped against the organic command console, leaving deep gouges in the living metal. His frills, usually a proud display of his rank, lay flat against his skull in primal fear. The humans had lured them, not with deception, not with trickery, but with kindness. They had let the Xerion fleet breach their defenses, allowed them to land their troops, even surrendered cities without resistance. And all the while, beneath their feet, beneath the very earth they had claimed as their own, something older had stirred. Ursek, the ship's chief scientist, staggered toward Xerwind, her emerald scales dull with shock. "The readings," she rasped, her voice barely audible over the groaning of the ship's failing infrastructure. They weren't ruins. They were tombs. Xerwind didn't need to see the data to know she was right. The screens flickered with distorted images of the surface. Where once there had been human cities, now there were only gaping maws in the earth, blackened fissures exhaling plumes of dust, and something far worse. Shapes moved in the darkness, not human, not even alive in any way the Xerion understood. Not sleek, not elegant, like Xerion biotech, but jagged, brutal things, forged in wars so ancient their names had been lost to time. They unfolded from the depths like waking giants, their limbs pistoning with hydraulic precision, their optics burning with cold, unfeeling light, and they were hunting. On the surface, Commander Samantha Grogan stood atop a ruined skyscraper, the wind whipping at her coat. Below her, the city burned, but not from Xerion bombardment. The fires had been set by human hands. A controlled burn, a sacrifice. Corporal Michael Emigan adjusted his rifle, his breath steady, despite the carnage unfolding around them. They really didn't see it coming, did they? Grogan didn't answer. She didn't need to. The Xerion had thought they were invading a world of soft, emotional creatures. They had expected resistance, fierce, perhaps, but ultimately futile. They had not expected this. A distant tremor shook the ground as another war machine emerged, its massive frame blotting out the sky. It moved with eerie silence, its every step calculated, efficient. It did not roar, it did not gloat. It simply exterminated. The Xerion forces, so proud, so certain of their superiority, now scrambled like prey. Their bioplasma weapons splashed harmlessly against the machine's armored hide. Their living ships, so graceful in the void, were torn apart like wet parchment by weapons that predated their civilization by millennia. Grogan exhaled slowly. Watching as the last of the Xerion drop, ships attempted to flee, only to be plucked from the sky by grasping metal claws. They should have listened to the warnings, she murmured. Aboard the Emerald Tide, Xerwind finally understood. The beacons scattered across the galaxy, the ancient warnings carved in dead languages, they had not been exaggerations. They had not been myths, they had been mercy. A final chance for any species arrogant enough to approach Terra to turn back. And the Xerion had ignored them. The last thing he saw before the hull split open was not fire, not destruction, but the cold, indifferent gaze of a machine as it reached for him. Then, darkness. In the aftermath, the machines did not celebrate. They did not linger. Their purpose fulfilled. They returned to the depths, sliding back into their tombs with the same silent inevitability as the turning of the tides. And above it all, the humans stood, not as conquerors, not as victims, but as something far more terrifying. The keepers of the leash. The galaxy would remember this day, and it would fear. The silence after the storm, the wreckage of the Emerald Tide drifted in the void. Its once gleaming bioluminescent hull, now a shattered carcass, its veins of photosynthetic energy flickering weakly before fading entirely. The battle had been swift, brutal, final. Across the Xerion armada, the same scene repeated, hulks of living metal torn open like overripe fruit, their organic circuitry blackened and still. No distress signals pulsed through the void, no escape pods jettisoned. There had been no time. The humans did not claim the remains. They did not scavenge the alien technology, though the Xerion's biomechanical wonders would have been a treasure beyond measure for any other species. Instead, they left the carcasses to drift, a warning written in twisted metal and frozen blood. On the bridge of the last surviving Xerion scout vessel, Navigator Kess trembled as she watched the data feeds. Her mandibles clicked in a rhythm of disbelief. The humans had not even looked at them. Their sensors had swept past the tiny ship as if it were debris, unworthy of notice. That indifference was worse than any attack. Kess had seen the recordings, the way the human war machines had moved with terrifying precision, dismantling the Xerion fleet, not with rage, but with the cold efficiency of gardeners pruning weeds. And then, when it was done, they had simply left. No gloating, no demands for surrender. Just silence. A new transmission crackled across the scout ship's comms. Not from the humans, but from the Xerion High Command. The voice of the Grand Archon was stripped of its usual arrogance, replaced by something Kess had never heard before: fear. All remaining forces, retreat. Fall back to the homeworld, the humans. They are not what we believed. Kess exhaled, her chitinous plates shuddering. She had studied human history, their wars, their stubborn defiance. She had thought she understood them. She had been wrong. The galaxy had always dismissed them as reckless, emotional, primitive. But now, Kes saw the truth. The humans were not reckless. They were patient, and they had been waiting. With a final lingering glance at the graveyard of her people's fleet, Kes input the coordinates for home. The galaxy would not forget this day, and neither would the Xerion.